It's been a year since we did a video on Google's quantum AI Willow chip, and at that time we said that our top pick for quantum computing was Google. So let's see how it's stacked up against the other quantum computing pure play companies out there.
And why not Google? They had a pretty epic year in spite of some moments where it was kind of touch and go. Of course, we had the tariff tantrum and they were working on those antitrust cases, both of which resulted in a pretty favorable ruling for Google for a mega cap company, up 60% in the last 12 months. Not so bad. But many of you complained Google is far from an actual quantum computing company. It is an internet search business. It's digital advertising. It's Google Cloud. So let's stack it up against those quantum pure plays that got so much hype in 2025.
And here's those pure play quantum stocks charted out here from our friends over at fiscal.ai. You're going to see a number of charts from them today. A great way to stack one business compared to another is to look at charts like these, and you can make those very easily with fiscal.ai. You can get 15% off any paid plan, even a pro plan, with the link in our video description or here on the screen, fiscal.ai/CSI.
We'll come back to some more charts from fiscal.ai on the financials of these businesses here in just a moment. IonQ charted out there in purple, finally had a bit of more rational price action on that one, up a mere 20% over the last 12 months. By contrast, Rigetti and D-Wave Quantum breakout years for those businesses as they picked up more R&D revenue. And the big laggard out of the four, Quantum Computing Inc., FKA, Innovative Beverage Corp., actually down about 20% in the last year.
So Google up 60% over the year, IonQ, Rigetti, both outperforming Google.
But I'd like to emphasize, up 60% in a year, we'll take it. But why do this review 1 year later? Well, Google's quantum AI subsidiary had another announcement back in October about that Willow chip, the Quantum Echoes algorithm, a big step toward real-world applications for quantum computing. Boy, this sounds super exciting. They are doing algorithms with potentially real-world use cases that they can actually use to benchmark against the same quantum computer or similar quantum computers. Casey, does this mean quantum computing is imminently becoming a thing in everyday life?
Reality check time. No. Here's an outline of the milestones that need to be reached before quantum computing can be profitable and used in everyday activities, solving problems. We've currently achieved milestone 2, quantum error correction, and they're now trying to get to milestone 3, building a long-lived logical qubit. What does that mean?
To put it in very simple terms, like any good supercomputer, quantum computing needs to run these algorithms with very few errors, especially as they scale up the number of qubits, which you can think of as being essentially the quantum computing equivalent of a transistor in classical computing. So as Google Quantum AI scales up the number of qubits in their quantum computing system, they need to continue to drive down the number of errors to less than 1 error per 1 million computational steps. So as you can see from Google's timeline, there are still a number of milestones that need to be reached before a quantum computer that operates either on a company's on-prem data center or accessed via the cloud is an economically viable solution and not just an R&D science project.
There's other quantum computing companies that are working on some of these milestones as well. This is a chart from the company Infleqtion, which is a SPAC merger. You can see that they have their milestones charted out to 2030. They think that maybe they can get to utility scale with quantum computing. Ambitious.
Now, to be fair, Infleqtion has a very different type of quantum computer and very different type of applications for its quantum computing technology. It seems that Things like quantum sensing will be a top use case for Infleqtion's hardware. So that might be one of the differences in the timeline for it. More details coming on that after Infleqtion completes that SPAC merger that Casey mentioned, probably sometime in early 2026. But what does that mean for you investors that are betting on these pure play companies? Besides some big jumps in revenue in the last year, not much has actually changed for these companies. Let's chart out the four pure plays: IonQ, Rigetti, D-Wave, and QCI. On the left, charted out is the trailing 12-month revenue for these companies over the last 3 years, 12 quarters. So some big growth rates, especially for IonQ and D-Wave in purple. But what about that chart on the right? That is the trailing 12-month loss from operating activities for all four companies.
Everybody's losing a lot of money.
Yeah, the hallmark of companies that are in R&D.
Yes, while those numbers on the left are impressive, on the right side, Nick, you can see that these companies are very squarely losing cash because of research and development into quantum computing. Massive amounts of money, actually.
Yeah, as a percentage of their revenue, it is quite steep, especially for IonQ. But to be fair, a couple of positives here for Rigetti and D-Wave this year. Their operating losses as a percentage of revenue, especially for D-Wave Quantum, has actually begun to narrow. Again, a very different type of quantum technology than the superconducting method that Google and IBM and others have been working on for a long time. And that could be some of the reason why they're making some progress towards, would appear anyways, some progress towards break even. But nevertheless, this is still what you could consider to be a race against the clock. And the time remaining on the clock for these companies is the cash that they have remaining on their balance sheet. Let's just take one of them as an example, IonQ, which is the quantum computing pure play in terms of revenue.
IonQ has a pretty healthy balance sheet. In the last 12 months, IonQ has nearly 1.5 billion in cash and long-term investments. Nick, why do you have total shares outstanding on this chart?
In order to raise that cash, IonQ did go out and sell a bunch of new stock in the last year. And so that's why they had the big jump. That's not great if you're planning on holding IonQ for the very long term in hopes that this emerges as one of the quantum computing leaders, perhaps by the end of this decade. However, the upshot here is IonQ has plenty of cash available to fund its development through 2030 after this latest round of fundraising. So at least there's that. And this is a similar story for all the other three pure play publicly traded quantum stocks as well.
And there are two new companies that are going to become public via SPAC merger, Infleqtion and Xanadu. Tell us a little bit about these two.
Infleqtion, we already briefly took a look at with their timeline of milestones through 2030. Xanadu also has a bit of a different take on quantum computing versus Google and superconducting qubits technology. They have photonic-based or light-based quantum computing. We'll take a look at both of these companies later in 2026 after they finish those mergers. But again, the story is going to be pretty similar. Yes, the revenue is growing quickly, but it's a pretty small base of revenue, and both companies are probably losing a substantial amount of money. So part of the rationale for the SPAC merger, they'll be able to fill up their balance sheet with a big chunk of fresh cash to fund their development operations. Once again, thanks to our friends at fiscal.ai for helping us out with these charts on these companies. Take a look at what they have to offer, fiscal.ai/CSI for 15% off. Casey, this is a 1-year review, and a number of the companies that we talked about a year ago, in addition to Google, to Alphabet, was the existing semiconductor manufacturing supply chain itself.
If you want to make quantum computers, you're going to have to go through some of these fab equipment providers, ASML, Applied Materials, Lam Research, Tokyo Electron, and KLA Corp. All of these companies supply some of the equipment that is used to research and develop quantum computing chips.
And in particular, a year ago, we called out Applied Materials as a possible supplier of deposition equipment. We talked about that Google Willow chip, and it was using aluminum. Applied Materials has a whole set of processes for aluminum deposition on chips. At the time, though, Applied Materials had very little in the way of public announcements about quantum computing. Fast forward a year later, they actually have quite a few companies that they have partnered with or are working with to develop quantum computing semiconductor technology. And in addition to that, utilizing other parts of the supply chain, for example, EDA, electronic design automation, the big one there being Synopsys, which just finished its purchase of Ansys, Ansys being a very large supplier of software to the quantum computing industry because they need to run a lot of simulations to get those computers working properly.
So headed into 2026, what are our favorite quantum computing stocks?
I think we're going to leave it unchanged. We still like Google, and of course, we still like NVIDIA. The other companies need to use a lot to run simulations, to develop their quantum computers. A lot of these companies running a hybrid approach, quantum classical computer, hardware hybrid model. So I think we're going to leave it unchanged. But we have some exciting stuff over on Semi Insider. Starting in January, we'll have a quantum computing industry index available for everybody over there. Check it out.
Thanks everybody for watching. Make sure you check us out over on chipstockinvestor.com. And as my boss used to tell me, have fun, make good choices. Take care, everybody.